web conference to prepare or not to prepare. What steps should companies be taking before the GDPR is finalized? Today's program is brought to you by Trustee. My name is Dave Cohen. I am the IAPP's Knowledge Manager, and I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, a few program details. Participating in today's program will automatically provide IAPP-certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. Others who are listening in can apply for those credits through an easy-to-use online form on our website. We'd also like to remind you that today's program is being recorded and will be provided free to register attendees approximately 48 hours following the live event. A link will be provided on one of the last slides in the presentation to access the recording. You can also email me if you'd like a copy of the slides. My contact information will be provided at the end of the program. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the program by typing them into the Q&A field to the right of your PowerPoint window, and your questions will be answered by the presenters at their discretion either during or after the presentation. And now on to our program, and I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Chris Babel is the CEO at Trustee and will be the moderator for today's program. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your background in privacy?
Sure. Chris Babel, again, the CEO of Trustee. Been here about 6 years, focused on privacy. Before that, spent about 15 years in the security side. But experience with Trustee is really helping the company over the last number of years move from just the certifications and seals that I think we were known for at the business level, and really transforming the business into a company that provides not only that, but also the kind of technology to allow you to manage, monitor, and scale your privacy program.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Welcome. And joining Chris on the panel, Caroline Olstedt Karlstrom is the Chief Counsel of Global Privacy at Klarna and works out of Stockholm, Sweden. Caroline, welcome to the program, and can you tell us a little bit about your privacy background?
Thank you very much. I'm heading a team of privacy specialists at the Klarna Group. So I have a CPO role, you could say. I'm responsible for both data protection strategy and compliance within the group. But I also have another hat. I'm the chairperson for the Swedish Data Protection Forum, which is a non-profit organization for DPOs in Sweden. I've been dealing with data protection issues for around 15 years, for 12 of them in private practice, assisting many multinationals on both compliance and strategical aspects of data protection issues.
Excellent. Great. Welcome, Caroline. Thanks for your time today. And to round out our panel, Marcus Morissette is the Global Privacy Officer at eBay. Marcus, how did you get into the field of privacy?
Hi, thanks, Dave. Like Chris, I actually have a security background. I've been in doing security and data protection for about 14 years. Prior to joining eBay 4 years ago, where I now run the global team, I ran my own security and privacy consulting company called Concise Consulting. And prior to that, worked in various either boutique firms, a firm called IOActive, and was with KPMG for a while. I have a background, I'm a lawyer, so I have a background in both litigation as well as general technology law and privacy. I've been doing privacy almost as long as privacy has been around.
Great. So as you can see, we have a lot of depth and experience on the panel. Welcome, Marcus. And with that, let's move to the program itself. And for that, I'll turn it over to Chris. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dave. So to kick this off, just from an agenda perspective, we've done the intro. I'll give a quick little overview highlighting some of the research that Trustee has done on the GDPR and kind of awareness, what companies are doing at a broad-based level. We'll turn it over to Caroline for her to give an example of what they're doing in Klarna, so you can get a perspective from an EU company. We'll then go back to Marcus for the U.S. perspective. Q&A at the end. Feel free, as some of you are already doing, to lodge any questions you have in that QA window. As David said, we'll be assembling those, and I'll be taking the three of us through any of those that come up. So make certain you type them in early, as they tend to all flood in as soon as we get to that part, and it's a little harder to call through them at that point. So feel free to type them in early. As we jump into kind of an overview, obviously the GDPR is in its final stages of negotiation, and I'll touch on some comments that Giovanni Butarelli had given earlier this week on kind of timing and things like that. But we had done a research study that I wanted to share with you to really try to assess where companies were generally. Of course, the background on it, just to give you a sense of timing, as we've had a lot of EU-related privacy things going on. The survey was carried out by a third party. It was done between the 18th of September and the 6th of October. So keep in mind on the 23rd of September is when you had the preliminary ruling against EU Safe Harbor, and obviously on the 6th, the kind of final version of that from the EU Court of Justice. So it was before that was finalized, but certainly EU and privacy was a big topic during the survey being in the field. It was a sample of 202 people, all people that had the ability to kind of prove that they knew something about privacy. So this wasn't just anyone, and they had to be at companies that had over 250 employees. They didn't know the trustee was the survey sponsor, and in terms of participation, we had 103 out of the U.S. and 99 out of Europe, with a pretty good mix between companies and people located in the UK, Germany, and France. So let's take a look at the results. First, we asked a general question around awareness, and honestly, of all the points of the survey result, this was the one that was most surprising to me, and that there was essentially 50% awareness of the GDPR, and this wasn't, are you aware of, you know, the specifics of X, Y, and Z? This was really, are you aware of it generally? And what surprised me most about it was that that awareness was kind of equally unaware, if you will, across the different countries surveyed, with about 50% awareness in the people that responded, both across the U.S., France, Germany, and the UK. As we dug in a little bit to the verticals that had more or less awareness, the financial services vertical had the highest awareness at 58%. Probably not surprising given that they're typically very compliance focused, have a lot of different things that they're worried and concerned about on that front. And maybe also not surprisingly, the technology sector had the least awareness at 43%, typically, you know, being a bit of a smaller sized company that may not be as compliance focused, but a bit worrisome given that, you know, technology companies are typically the highest users of data and highest movers, if you will, of data. We tried to also take a perspective and snapshot of big versus small and kind of maturity of privacy program. And companies that, you know, we put in a bucket of more mature privacy programs, and the qualifying question was, you know, do you have 10 to 25 or more privacy employees? That group had the highest awareness. But even if you combine all those things, you know, for the highest at 58% in the sector, the lowest at 43%, you know, that could have been 95 and 5. And it really shows that this band of kind of 50% awareness across the board, and almost even then in all sectors, it's not that much variability, was really kind of the driving point to make on the survey results here. We moved beyond awareness and said, okay, for those that are aware, so again, for the 50% that said that they were aware, we started to try and get into questions, and all the rest of these refer to that audience of what are you doing? Are you budgeting? Are you preparing? What are you most worried about? And that'll be the next few slides here. Of those that were aware, 2/3 said that they were starting to prepare even before the law was finalized. And here's where you start to see a split between the countries, with some of the European countries like Germany and the UK leading at 82 and 71% in that preparation, with the US and France at 60. And keep in mind here, especially when we talk about the second part of this on budget, that remember from the slide before, it was the bigger companies generally that were most aware. So when we started to ask questions like budgets, this likely skewed away from the smaller companies that had, you know, only 250, maybe 500 or 1,000 employees, and skewed larger. But 83% had already started to allocate some budget against the GDPR, whether that be in preparation or actual implementation over the next few years. And a bit actually surprising to me is that 21% had said they'd actually already allocated $500,000 or more to address the changes that are required by this effort over the next few years. So budget's already starting to be allocated. When we started to ask the question of, well, what are you doing? What does preparing mean? I think you got what would be expected. With the GDPR not finalized, the number of drafts still being worked, you had a lot of responses that were kind of more in the background preparation area, the first and highest of which was kind of reviewing IT systems, security systems, where data is, making certain that you had a good baseline knowledge of what was happening inside your enterprise. And I won't read all of these, but some of the other ones where, you know, you've briefed and started to share what this means with management, with the board of directors. You're researching the changes. The second area that we'd highlighted here in the 24% bucket was kind of the one question that we specifically had put in there to ask about implementation that kind of took you the step beyond the preparation, the background information, the educating of teams. And that question really got at are you implementing changes today to start to impact things and get ready, even though the GDPR hadn't been finalized? And 24% of people actually said they were already starting to take action today to try and work to address it. When we got into what are the key concern areas within the regulation, and asking those types of questions, not surprisingly, I think the level of fines and the ability for DPAs to fine companies for non-compliance was the biggest issue at 42%. Tighter consent requirements came in second at 37%. And of course, we asked kind of the opposite question, how many of you aren't concerned at all about any of these proposed changes? And that was 6%. So either we've got a very slim number of companies that are incredibly well prepared and have everything totally dialed, or that group is probably really in need of additional awareness, because there are quite a number of changes, as we all know, in the GDPR. When we ask companies what help is needed, what are you looking to get assistance on, I think the first two were really not surprising. I need the second one, 53%, more information on what the changes are, understanding what the final draft is. And then the biggest one at 55%, not only do I need to know what's legally in the document, I need to understand, what does that mean for implementation? What are the FAQs around it? What are the things you typically see soon after any regulation is passed that starts to give guidance by DPA, et cetera, on what to really do and what is expected of you to achieve those compliance guidelines. But the third highest one that jumped out was, I think, this realization that a lot of privacy programs are kind of run on, Word documents, spreadsheets, SharePoints, things of that nature. And with something as comprehensive as the GDPR, there was really a need to start thinking about how do I, in order to scale this across my full enterprise and make it work on a day in and day out basis, which is kind of more required by the regulation, how do I implement technology to help me meet these compliance requirements? And I've always said, coming with my security background, privacy to me has kind of lagged security by 15 or 20 years in terms of technology implementation. And I think companies were starting to say and highlight that that was the types of things that they needed. And last year, from me, to raise it back up a level, interestingly, almost 3/4 of people said the GDPR is the most important change in data privacy legislation in the last 20 years, really at a global level. They believe that the regulation has kind of true teeth with the fining numbers that are being talked about in terms of percentage of global turnover. And there was also this belief at the 77% level that it would actively be enforced by regulators, with the vast majority of people saying that enforcement would be much stronger and much more robust than it was against things like the cookie directive. They also believe that they would spend more on this, obviously, as it's a much more comprehensive regulation than the cookie directive was. Last year, over 50% of people said they were placing it high or very high in the corporate risk register. And I think one of the things that I see is companies, at least in the U.S., when they do their kind of government financial filings with the SEC as a publicly traded company, you're starting to see privacy points hit the risk factors that are shared with investors and shared with the investing community. And I originally started my career as an investment banker, and we all know that when things hit that top of the line list and are shared with investors, that it's really starting to kind of get mind share inside the enterprise. So hopefully that is a helpful backdrop in terms of what we're seeing generally. I'm going to turn it over to Caroline now to get into details and examples of what you're seeing from companies in the EU. Caroline, take it away.
Thank you. So I will bring you some information around what it is that we are doing internally, our considerations around this, but I will also start with a bit of a background in general, because I think that data privacy in general, of course, means an increased interest here, and we can see that from the consumers, from media partners, etc., and the general public, they are all, also in Europe right now, becoming more and more aware of the privacy issues. So the GDPR, the Safe Harbor, and all these developments that we've had over the fall now, in general, creates very much a positive focus on these aspects. So with increased focus, of course, and attention also comes better understanding and focus within the organization. So how do you use this then? we use this in order to try to communicate internally to say that we need to transform the potential risks that we see here into a competitive advantage, basically. It will be something that is very positive for us if we can be prepared and start out early in trying to amend whatever processes or systems that will be necessary. So even if you perhaps can't sell data protection or data privacy itself within the organization, sometimes it's easier to just sell the nice idea of a happy customer or a happy member or user. The accountability, of course, is an important aspect of this. It's one of the basic principles that GDPR brings. And that we can actually now then also see in the clear text. It entails so many things, but one thing is that it's important in order to build trustful relationships with the consumers, the merchants, partners, and regulators, etc. So by actually being able to demonstrate accountability and being able to say already now that we are focused on this and that we are focused on being compliant or staying compliant or bringing more compliance from a data privacy perspective means that we can also then build good and early relationships with the regulators. This is something, of course, that is a bit different in the various jurisdictions in Europe. We have already today regulators with a very different approach in some areas. Specifically in the Nordic areas, in the Nordics, the regulators are perhaps not so visible as, for instance, in Germany or in the UK or France. But nevertheless, it's always important. We should also keep in mind, of course, that also the regulators right now are striving in order to learn more, to adapt and to find new ways and reassess practices, etc. So it could actually be a very good thing for building a good relationship to try to reach out to the regulators already now. What is important from my perspective within the organization is that data protection is so much more than just compliance. In our internal dialogues, I've found it very important to highlight that in every privacy-related issue, you need, of course, also to take so many other factors into account. And what comes out in the end is very much a complex picture of various needs. Right now, we are making changes to one of the variables to the EU regulation. And I can see now that actually there is a bit of text missing on the slide, but in the left corner of the picture, in the 3 dots, there should be text saying local, EU, and global legislation. So we see some changes in the regulatory framework, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole picture changes. So still, we have to stay cool, but focus on the important aspects here. And yet again, as just mentioned, good privacy practice is actually something that is starting to become also a user or customer need, a business need, etc. So hopefully it will provide you with some good arguments that you can use for highlighting internally the need to change. So where would I start then? I would start by using the existing regime. Are there any gaps today? When we talk about if we compare the GDPR to the present directive, still there are so many basic principles that are still relevant for what we need to do with the data, how we are able to process the data, how we can transfer, etc. And for large organizations, then, Pramila, I would say that the DPO, if you have one on board, should already perhaps make an initial assessment. The DPO often knows business best and may have all the tools available for actually trying to make a gap analysis of already what we might be lacking in relation to the present regime. I think that would be a good start. I think also that it's very important to make friends internally. This is something that we have found that it's important to be very hands-on, to stay visible, to build awareness, and to try to educate, of course, about the upcoming challenges that we then perhaps see. And this goes for everyone, both on the executive level as well as in the various teams with product technicians, in engineering, HR, and other places. For small organizations, on the other hand, perhaps this is a bit more of a challenge if you don't have already a DPO in place. But still, I would say that it's important to try to identify now the major issues that you might already have with regards to the gap already in relation to the present regime. So it could be an idea, of course, to reach out to an external lawyer, for instance, or other consulting firms. But also, I would like to mention specifically the local DPO organizations, like the Swedish Data Protection Forum that I represent myself. I would say that it's important to try to liaise, to learn, to analyze together, and to some extent try to find a way forward in this. The sanctions, of course. Use the sanctions as an example of why you do need some extra attention on these issues. Management and board should be aware, as privacy issues are right now moving from something that is a human right in the EU, but it's also becoming a corporate risk that needs attention. So flag this to management. Hopefully then you will get, if you don't already have a DPO in office, you have a good chance of getting one. You need at least a proper budget so that you are able to actually try to address these issues going forward. If possible, I would like to mention for a moment that the DPO in place is a very important factor in this from my perspective, because it means also that you would have someone internally who actually owns these issues. So going forward, we will perhaps see that there will be at least partly some organizations for which it would be mandatory to have a DPO in place. But nevertheless, I still find it important just for ownership around these issues. What we have started to focus on already then in Klarna as the next step is to also map and analyze, of course. We are starting to document and analyze how we process data and where we have perhaps gaps that we need to attend to. Data lifecycle management in general is something, of course, that it's important to focus on. But from our perspective, we are perhaps putting a bit extra effort into this right now. In the next phase, we are also focusing on vendor and supplier management, and we are setting a strategy specifically for that. For organizations that heavily depend on suppliers, for instance, it's of course important to make sure that you focus also on them. From a European perspective, this is sometimes a challenge when we see large US suppliers with a bit of a different approach to data privacy. So they could need some extra attention right now when we see GDPR moving on. Data breach and PII, privacy by design, etc. All these aspects that entails somehow new technical aspects or new procedures in place will actually take some extra time probably within an organization. So we are already focusing on this right now, trying to see what we can do in order to put in place more clear processes. For PIA, we will be using a technical tool, but anyhow, how you choose to do this or whichever possibilities you might have internally, whether it's a large or small company, it's still something that I think it's important to start focusing on quite quickly because it will take some time. Taking into account, for instance, ongoing procurement for new systems, it would be an idea to already now think about the new or the changed requirements for these systems. International transfers, of course, is a specific challenge right now. We have the safe harbor. That brought, from a positive view, a side effect that it attracted full attention, so to say. Suddenly, almost every company was focusing on this issue. There was at least information around international transfers and the challenges around the safe harbor decision. But it means also that companies need to have some kind of a strategy around both short-term as well as a long-term strategy. Standard contractual clauses, of course, being a possibility right now, but how do we use this going forward? You have to map your requirements in relation to the potential changes, of course, and see what you need in terms of transfer. For us, specifically for Klarna, we were lucky. We already had quite a good focus on the safe harbor issue when it arose. We already had established some new ways of being able to transfer in some negotiations. We also build our service specifically on 2 platforms. So you need to focus on this and see perhaps if there is something that you might need to attend to a bit more urgently. Specifically then, I would like to mention that hands-on right now to try to bring awareness and some information on GDPR within the organization is quite important. Even though the details perhaps might be not that clear, even though we might see them in a week's time, still I find it important to make sure that everyone in the organization and around in the different teams at least know that something is going on. It gives us some assurance about that there will not be ongoing procurement or ongoing investments in various platforms, etc., that we at least don't know about, so that we are able to be part of the discussions and to provide some advice, perhaps. We are also placing extra focus on data management registers. In Sweden, having a DPO means, of course, that we already need to maintain a register of ongoing data processing activities, but we are expanding the scope. This is an important instrument for us, and it means that we have all, or at least the relevant information assembled in one place for many of our important systems. So it makes us a bit, it gives us the possibility of being able to manage challenges in some aspects, whether it is around transfers or outsourcing or some other kind. It also gives us the possibility to be able to audit when relevant, of course, but also to place extra attention or bring training, for instance, to specific teams. We are also investing in even more effective vendor supply management. We have identified a good number of important service providers, and we are dealing with them specifically. At the moment, trying to place extra safeguards around our cooperation. We are also focusing on extra checkpoints. We are reinforcing the cross-functional reviews. For Klarna being a credit market company, it means that we already have processes around this in place. But this is an important tool for us in order, again, to bring more awareness to the teams and to the different parts of the organization. In general, we are also assigning responsibility throughout the organization, working a lot with our data protection champions. It's a network of ambassadors that we have throughout the organization for awareness, for rollout, and to be able to stay very much hands-on. Finally, I would just like to mention that 2 years will go fast, so take this opportunity to benchmark against the existing directive as mentioned. If you lack something, try to find out what and make sure that you have it in place. Also to cooperate. Industry-wide, regional, etc., work with the DPO organization or so, but try to cooperate around finding best practices and a good way forward. And then I would like specifically to say that actually this is not just scary, but it's actually quite fun. This is very interesting time. So very much is happening in our area right now, and it's quite exciting, so don't forget that. And with that, I am handing over to Marcus for the US side of things.
Thanks, Carolyn. I think, Carolyn, I think your point is true. I think there's more. I've seen more movements and more happenings in the last several weeks in privacy than we've seen over some years. So I think everyone, don't be daunted by this, but also don't be frozen by it either. Carolyn's list there is pretty good. I'm not, from a U.S. perspective, if you were to take her slide there and make a checklist out of it, quite frankly, you'd be in good shape. But I think you have to almost roll back a step. My direct experience, having been a consultant for as long as I was, and then if you look at the results of the survey, tells me that U.S. companies, even though we've had the regulation in place, we've had safe harbor in place for years, just like it was with SOX and the other issues, U.S. companies tend to do the bare minimum to meet an obligation. And privacy is one of those areas. I think U.S. companies, for the most part, obviously if they're only U.S. focused, are going to have a very minimal privacy program. But even the ones that have a foothold in Europe have done the minimum amount to get ready or to be, quote, compliant with either their countries, whatever country in Europe they operate, their law, their implementation of the regulation, or if it was safe harbor, to meet the minimal safe harbor. So I think the first step I would take would be to really do a self-assessment. Sit down over your favorite beverage here in the next day or two, whether it's coffee in the morning or an IPA at night, and say, what does my team look like? What does our team look like? And more importantly, what does our business do? Where are we operating? What data are we collecting? Where are we collecting it? How are we using it? You don't have to do a full data map to know all that. You should, if you've been with your company and been doing privacy for any great length of time, you should be able to answer some of those questions. And I think that'll help you assess kind of where to start, because I think what's going to happen here, and keep in mind, I have been notoriously and publicly very bearish on both the regulation or the GDPR actually kicking in, but I think we've seen movement in the last week or so, and even the statements yesterday that show a Europe willing to move and get something implemented. And I think the safe harbor, the Schrems decision, shows a willingness to now stop talking about enforcing and increasing privacy, but actually doing something. So I think the times have changed. So I think you have to just have a conversation with your team, with yourself, and figure out where you're at. And then the next step is to obviously make sure that your leadership, wherever privacy is positioned in your company, because privacy sits in various different places. Sometimes it's in legal, like it is at eBay. Sometimes it's in the business. Sometimes it's bifurcated and even trifurcated as it is at Facebook. So start having conversations up your leadership chain and let them know what's coming. Let them know some of the key areas. You don't have to get into details, but give them big picture ideas and tell them you're working on it, but that there's going to be some significant changes that are going to need to take place. I think you need to start having that education now. I think the other key is if you do operate in Europe, and if you don't have a good relationship with your primary data protection authority, I would suggest getting one in place really quickly, whether that's your European team reaching out, whether that's you. Again, I don't think we necessarily need to all fly to Europe suddenly, but I think if you're not on good terms and haven't had a good working relationship with at least your primary DPA, you need to start having that, because they're going to be key to your relationship and your ability to comply with this new set of this new regulation going forward. The DPO registration, I think, is an interesting subject. I saw some questions on it about, do we have to have it? Are we going to be required? I think there's already some pretty clear guidance on when you need a DPO. And if you've got, if you're a major U.S. company with a European data controller, you're in Ireland or you're in the United Kingdom or you're in Luxembourg like we are, you pretty clearly have a requirement to already have a DPO. So whether that's your European counsel or your European privacy head serving as a DPO, as we do on our business side, or hiring a consultant to do your DPO work, which is what we do in some jurisdictions for our employee work, because a lot of this focuses on user data, but there's also probably a whole other webinar we could have on employee data. I think, so with that said, I think, you have to look at your staffing. Once you've done your self-assessment, how are you positioned in Europe? Do you have one person, 5 people, no people? And then I really think the next step here, and I've seen a couple of questions on data lifecycle management and data mapping and inventory controls and how do you start. There's various ways to do this. Again, I think there's some high-level, very basic data mapping that can be done. Look at your websites, look at all your collection points. Those should be fairly logical. Try to get an idea of what your notices say at those collection points. Because what's going to be key for the regulation, as Carolyn points out, is the ability to document your appropriate processing of data. And that's going to be a kind of I hate to use a pun, kind of be a foreign concept for a lot of U.S. companies. That means you're going to have to be able to show, if asked, for all of the personal information you've collected, you most likely had a notice and you gave some indication to the data subject of the purposes of that, why you were collecting it and what you were going to do with it, how you're going to process it. And your data mapping, however you do it, automated through tools like people like Trustee have, or some other people, or manual, or combination of both. Essentially what you want your data map or your data inventory to show is what data was collected and what were the purposes that it was collected under, and how is it being used in the organization. Where is it being stored? Who has access to it? How is it classified? How long are you retaining it? So I think there's some 5 or 6 basic questions around the life cycle: collection, use, retention and deletion, disclosure, and security, that if you have a basic data map in place, or at least an ability to start one, that's going to be, I think, ultimately a requirement on an ongoing basis once the regulation becomes fully effective. But it's also going to help you now in preparing to look at some of the other aspects of compliance. Sorry, I'm having to click and talk. It's not a good. So, substantively, I think the latest draft I've seen that my European team has passed to me is a November 15th draft. I think you need to get familiar with that draft, whether you do it directly or you get one of your outside counsels to give you a summary, or your European team to give you a summary. But I think you need to get at least familiar with that draft. There's no guarantee that that's the draft we're going to see, but again, based on the statements yesterday, I think we're pretty close. I don't know if we're truly talking final, passage, final approval in the next month, I'm not sure how much more changes to the draft we're going to see. I think some of the big picture items are there. So I think you could start getting familiar with it now. I think your GR team, again, I put this bullet in, quite frankly, before the statements of yesterday in Silicon Valley. This was to really stay engaged with your GR team because of the process. I don't know if any of you have been having your GR team involved, but there has been some ability, I think, by industry to affect some of the provisions. I think we're looking at a draft that was actually written with some good input from some trade industries, some trade associations, and from U.S. companies. So hopefully that will continue right until the end. And like I said previously, start now having a conversation with your management about big picture items, stuff that's going to come. And if you can start a gap assessment, obviously on the November version, that would be kind of bonus. I will say, I think substantively, one of the big issues that you're going to have is knowing what changes you're going to have to make to that you can control, implementing a PIA process, doing a data lifecycle management, doing the things that are privacy program based that you hopefully can control through your budget and your workforce. But there's going to be a lot more that's going to need to change that the business is going to have to be aware of and agree to, product changes. I think explicit consent for marketing is going to be one of those areas. Most U.S. companies operate on an opt-out basis. I think between the changes we're seeing here with the GDPR, as well as the changes in CASL. I don't know if any of you are aware, but come 2017 in Canada, you're going to need pretty much express consent for commercial messaging. So I think the tide has changed, and this concept of opt-out, just people automatically, by use of a service or a registration for a service, automatically receiving email marketing, but being able to opt out, I think those times are coming to an end. And so I think you're going to have, that's one of the key areas I would start having a conversation with your business, because that's usually a big pain point. People usually point to that being depending on your business model, but for companies like eBay, being able to market to and contact and encourage use of the site, that's the whole reason we're in business. So I'm going to wrap up here. I'm getting the hook. I think, again, that checklist from, if you look at my slides, mine are more kind of process, what to do, sort of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but really do something. I think in my last slide here, 2018, this is really going to depend on when it kicks in, but we're looking most likely, based on the current timeline, early 2018. But that isn't wait till then to do it. There's going to be a phased-in approach, and that will mean by early 2018, you'll have to have everything in place to meet the substantive parts of the regulation. So again, I would start now. I wouldn't panic, but I would definitely start thinking about privacy on a much different level than we've thought about it previously. Dave, back to you.
I'll jump in. I've got one more page here before I jump into some of the questions, and this is Chris again. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Caroline, for the perspectives. I think we had an event in San Francisco on Tuesday where Butarelli had WebExed into it and shared a bunch of feedback, and I've included some of the quotes here on the page on the left here. He went off a little bit and said some things I'll highlight that weren't quite in the exact messaging, but I think the key is, first point he kind of explicitly said, and it was the most strong I've heard kind of from a European, saying, next week, just in time for Christmas, we expect the Parliament and Council to reach a political agreement on the GDPR. So that was the strongest messaging I'd heard, that this is going to be in kind of final form as of next week. I think he'd even joked that, Santa Claus was going to come a few days early and deliver a gift when he made a verbal comment. I think that he outlined a timeline that had said, final adoption of the regulation will take a few more months. He was pointing to April or May of 2016, with full kind of applicability and enforcement starting 2 years later. He was questioned in that session about, we've heard it being pulled up and trying to be made 18 months. Is there any possibility for that? And he said, well, that's still in discussion. He was pretty firm in his belief that it was going to be kind of 2-year window upon which to get these things in process, because there is an understanding that there's quite a number of changes in the current versions of the regulation as they come together. And then last but not least, he'd certainly, and I would say, and I saw it covered by some reporters there, he was give a pretty stern warning saying, get going now. I think he even referenced back to saying, don't do what happened with the EU Safe Harbor where everyone waited, and then when it came in place, U.S. companies complained and said, I'm not ready. He said, you've got the 2 years, use them wisely, as the end enforcement date will be one that won't move. There's going to be links to that presentation that he gave on the trustee site. They're not up quite yet. We're still pulling it together, but you can look there on the next few days for it. And then also here on the right part of this page, there's a link, but you can also just go to the general trustee site, look under business resources and research, and you can get the full version of the research that I was talking from earlier. So we have a number of questions. Let's dive right into them. First, maybe back to Marcus and Caroline, a bunch of questions on kind of, and you've talked a little bit about this, but I think they were even the next level down in specificity on, how do you really do these things? Like, do you look specifically to external tools of X and Y and Z? Do you use any technologies to do this? Is it kind of ad hoc methodology? A lot of questions on the, technology side of, what do you use and how do you do it?
Yes, there's a mix, of course, and it depends also very much on the size of the company. We have chosen basically to work around 2 electronic tools. One is the data management object that we call it, but the data management register, where we assemble lots of information around ownership, around the legal grounds for the processing of the personal data contained in the register, various assessments that have been made, if there is perhaps some outsourcing relevant for that, any data protection, if there is any agreements in relation to that needs to be covered, etc. So we try to assemble kind of all information in one place. Next phase, we will also start using a system of alerts in this. So we will include this in our scheduled plan for revisions by the Global Privacy Office. So it means that it will actually start ticking out whenever we see that there is a need for review. Furthermore, we are also specifically implementing an electronic tool for privacy impact assessments. We found that to be quite effective, and it brings so many other aspects to this, not in practice, just to be able to administer the PIA process, but also, again, for training, for awareness, for simplicity, actually, also. Being a tech company, it's easier, I found, to implement a tool than even if it's a simple Word or Excel sheet. So we have pretty much most of the processes up around these 2 electronic tools.
I think from my perspective, Chris, I think when you're talking about data mapping, I think you need to partner with your InfoSec. They should already be worried about what data the company has, where it's at, how it's classified, and how it's being protected. I mean, one can assume that you have an InfoSec that has data classification, data handling standards. I mean, and again, the privacy team isn't, while security is an element of privacy, we don't own the front line in doing that. So my first reaction would be partner with them. Are they already utilizing a tool or a process or a consultant? And can you either leverage that, get involved in that, make that better? That's our situation at eBay. The team, privacy has done its own data mapping, and we've got InfoSec off on its own, doing its own, and we're trying to pull those 2 processes together. Because again, I think the key for the regulation purposes, a lot of people do a data mapping or an inventory, and it sits on the shelf. I mean, the infamous shelfware, meaning it doesn't get updated. It's not a living, breathing document. That's not going to do you any good. Having a snapshot in time, just like we would do like a PCI assessment, having a snapshot of your infrastructure on January 15th, 2016 is not going to help you it's going to be out a day later as soon as somebody makes a change to a system or adds a new collection point. So it's got to live and breathe. Again, whether there's tools out there, obviously GRC tools like Archer or Open Pages or what have you. There's some off-the-shelf stuff. Be wary of consultants. I think there's a lot of vaporware. A lot of people will sell you on their process, and it's stuff you could probably do on your own, I think, with some creativity. But it's got to reflect the nature of your business and the nature of your data lifecycle management.
I think one thing I'd add to that, kind of stepping out of the moderator role for a second, putting on my trustee supporting thousands of customers and thinking about this, I think a lot of people have looked at tools and technologies and in the past used, like I referenced earlier, things like Word, Excel, SharePoint, et cetera, which I think are a great spot to get you started when it comes to technology. We've seen a number of companies, like you said, Marcus, as part of a broader company-wide implementation of a GRC system, kind of use that as a method to kind of try to run a compliance process around PIAs, but are oftentimes challenged in the sense that the privacy content isn't in there to really help people get over the hump. And I know Klarna has used some technologies. We built a technology you can see on our site called Privacy Assessment Automation and helping you do PIAs. I encourage people looking at that to take a look, and that'll be my one little sales pitch for a great technology that we think has helped companies as small as 100, 150 since our launch in March of earlier this year, all the way up to companies that have 100,000 plus employees and helping them really think through this process and automate it. Jumping around to other questions, this one, Marcus, I might aim a bit more at you. I know that you have your BCR. You've had it for quite some time. I think there was a question around, does the GDPR have kind of applicability, make any major changes to someone that either has a BCR like yourself or more broadly someone that's maybe thinking about a BCR?
Yeah, I think it's unclear at this point what the impact. I think there were some questions on, not only country level adequacy. The EC has a list of countries it considers adequate for data transfers. I think some of that's a joke. I mean, Andorra is on there, for crying out loud. I mean, but I think also on the remaining 3 adequacy mechanisms, will you have to reset? I would assume that any discussion of a new Safe Harbor 2.0 would be, if they're smart, the substance of that program would be written around the GDPR. But I would also assume that, the standard contract clauses will themselves be modified. Then that leaves the binding corporate rules. I mean, the binding corporate rules, for the most part, aren't written in a very tactical way. I mean, if you've read anyone's BCRs, they're not a privacy policy or a standard. They're a high-level sort of mission statement, privacy constitution, if you will. But I can tell you, we are contemplating a BCR refresh once the GDPR is finalized, most likely to look to have a revised commitment, because that's really what a BCR is. It's a company's corporate commitment to privacy at a corporate level. We're going to revise our BCRs, give more of a facelift to them, hopefully timed around the final implementation. We haven't been told absolutely we have to do that by our primary DPA and the 2 backup jurisdictions, but we feel that's something that you should consider. So yeah, anyone who's on the call, I'd be relatively shocked if there were many BCR shops on the call, but if there are, congratulations. And yeah, I would consider, along with one of your items, maybe not the highest priority, but one of your items would be to take a look substantively at your BCRs and say, is there anything we're going to need to get a refresh on, keeping in mind the BCR process is lengthy and, again, really relies on your relationship with your DPAs.
Caroline, I didn't mean to exclude you from that question, but anything you'd like to add there?
Well, at the moment, actually, we are also starting to think about BCRs. I think it's a good approach and a good way forward, not just for major companies. But as Marcus also pointed out, that is a bit further down the road. So from our perspective, we're waiting and seeing a bit more what is happening in general. And as mentioned before, what we have picked up also here, and that might be a specific Nordic issue in Europe, but it's the fact that also actually the DPAs are a bit hesitant right now. So I would wait a little while before perhaps approaching them on an issue like that.
Yeah, and let me reiterate. I think that's. I mean, I have literally a deck I'm working on for my general counsel, and I have just that statement that we're not. I would not, if I had a BCR in place, or even quite frankly a new BCR application, I would probably hold off because submitting it now is going to just be you're in a clog anyways, and no DPA is going to act. There's a lot of consensus seeking by the DPAs, and so I think you'd be a little more reposeful. I will say, I know we're running low on time, but for years I had to defend the BCRs and whether they were business limiting and do we really need them. And in the last month and a half, I have gotten many a congratulatory email on how great it was that we had the BCRs in place. So.
Yeah, that's probably turned pretty quickly. I think, we are, one of the other avenues I might point out is, through the referential that was announced between kind of the APEC and BCRs for companies that, could do a APEC type certification. We've seen one large health-related company use that as a way to be going through the BCR process, and I think that there is absolutely synergy there that we're seeing in terms of being able to operationalize kind of one effort that gets you a lot of cross synergy, and then would, once the BCR is completed, have good interoperability of data transfer between, the 49 really kind of biggest economies in the world, kind of excluding India. And that process was moving kind of quite quickly and quite inexpensively, I think, relative to other BCRs that I've seen clients pursue. It absolutely got bogged down in the last 3 to 6 months as all of the safe harbor and other things have come along. So I agree with both of your comments of if you're thinking about starting in one regard, you might be worried about EU safe harbor, it's long-term sustainability, you don't like model clauses, want to get started right away. But I would reiterate what both the others are saying, and that seems to be a process that has slowed considerably given all the other issues at hand. Marcus, you kind of seen one of the other questions in here that I wanted to pick up. Clearly a number of Canadians on the phone, so to answer two of the questions there I think that were relevant. One is specific to our research. We did not include Canada in the research. Apologies if that offends one up there, but we didn't do that to that specific question. But when it comes to the broader question around adequacy, it was asked in the context of Canada. At our event last Tuesday again, we'd asked some of the Europeans kind of this specific question of, do the countries that are deemed adequate once the GDPR happens, are they kind of grandfathered in as they currently are? Or does that require, kind of an update across the board and a reassessment of each of those adequacy findings? And the initial read back, although I will, not quote the person because they also said they need to go back and make certain, but the initial response was that, yes, adequacy would continue under the GDPR passing, but they were going to confirm that. So I think you might, now that the question's been asked, see further guidance when the GDPR comes out, or soon thereafter in some of the FAQs that I think we all expect them to be driving.
I would think it would be, to use a really big word at 9 o'clock in the morning, I think it would be Pollyannic to think, though, that countries like Canada or Australia that have fairly robust EU-centric privacy laws in PIPEDA or in the the new APPs, I think it would be. I think you'll see, again, maybe not instantaneously, but I think you'll see PIPEDA perhaps being updated to change to be more in line with the GDPR. I mean, they already are in the other formats. Like I said, CASL is a much more burdensome marketing regime, so it already kind of meets. They were almost ahead of the GDPR in that sense. So I think the adequacy mechanisms. I mean, Europe has seen the turmoil that getting rid of safe harbor overnight caused. They're not going to get rid of these adequacy determinations. The EC won't, because again, it's an EC discussion, really working with the 29 group, not an unilateral. The Schrems was a unilateral, and then the ECJ supporting that action. So I think the adequacy mechanisms are fine. I think if you bring your program up to speed with the GDPR, you won't really have to worry about it anyway.
Good. Thanks for that. I know we're here at the top of the hour. I've got one last question for you to up-level a little bit. If you had to pick kind of in all the things out there in the GDPR, and there are certainly a lot of changes. If you had to very quickly just pick one on the pro, one on the con side, what's the one that's kind of easy, that you've got nailed, that you don't think as much for a typical business like yours to worry about because you've either done it in the past or what have you? And what's the one that when you look at you think is kind of operationally most burdensome, just in terms of highlighting maybe some areas that companies can start their focus on if they look and feel like you?
Is that for me, Chris? I think the low-hanging fruit for us is obviously the DPO work. We've already got a robust network of DPOs in place based on our data controller structure, so I'm not too concerned about that. There wasn't a lot of talk of then now, single jurisdiction or what DPAs are you now going to be regulated by? Is it now your home country, or is it every DPA? So that's a concern. The con, I think the hardest is going to be, quite frankly, I'd have to split that between an actual, real, robust data controls, data inventory process that's living, breathing, and at any point can show, can be an evidence of processing authorization, and or building and implementing a true privacy by design program.
Yeah, and I can only echo that, because I still also think under the present regime, privacy by design, it's so very much a challenge, and perhaps not so much actually because of the actual regulation and the upcoming text potentially, but in practice, to actually solve the challenge in practice to get from the global privacy office corner to the teams, the technical teams in the house, to actually implement this all the way down. If anyone has the answer on that in practice, please give me an email or a call. And then for the upside, I think, yes, accountability and the documentation. I think it's good, it's very relevant, and it's we are already in practice to some extent there, and it's quite good, actually, good starting point. And as I am speaking, can I just, as a very last point, mention that for the small, as I know in the Nordics, there are so many challenges to many organizations that don't even have a DPO on board, that don't have a lawyer or an InfoSec person or anyone focusing on this. So start out by actually trying to get ownership of the privacy and data security aspects in general, and work from there. But that's a specific Europe and Northern Europe issue, perhaps.
So Dave, I'll turn it back to you, but certainly try to do the best to get through a number of these questions and bunch them together. But certainly on my behalf, if anyone has any additional questions that we can be helpful with, email's on the screen, and email away should you have follow-up questions.
Yes, thanks very much, Chris, and I was going to echo that as well. I'd like to thank all of you out there in the virtual audience for submitting such great questions. We got a lot of them, and we were, Chris, you did a great job at handling a number of them and combining them, but there are still some unanswered. So if you continue to have questions, please do feel free to send a note out to Chris or Caroline or Marcus, and I'm sure they'll do their best to provide what answers they can. And with that, a hearty thank you, Chris, Caroline, and Marcus, for that excellent view on an ever-evolving kind of prognostication of what's about to happen. I'm sure that folks appreciate your perspectives, and for all of you out there in the audience, I hope that you got at least some of what you were looking for. A big thank you to Trustee for supporting the program here for us at the IAPP. We very much appreciate that, and for making this program free and available to all of you. Again, I hope you have some valuable takeaways from today's program. And thank you to all of you who dialed in and took some time out of your days to join us. And on that note, if you wouldn't mind, if you're still on the line with us, there's a link in front of you. It's literally a 2-minute survey. It's been timed. We just want to know how you enjoyed this program, what you thought of the speakers and the content, and also, importantly, give us ideas about what we might cover on these web conference programs moving forward. We constantly mine that for ideas from you all out there who we want to provide you with the information you need to do your jobs. So click on over to that link, take 2 minutes to fill out that survey for us. We very much appreciate it. And of course,
Hey,
yes.
hey, Dave, I'm willing to stay on. I mean, there's some questions that went unanswered. I don't know if you want to end the webinar or let it go for another couple of minutes. If people still feel their questions haven't been answered, I can try via chat, or it's up to you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Marcus. That's a very gracious offer. We certainly can stay on the line for a little bit. Let me just do some finishing remarks here for those that need to drop, and then if you'd like to stay on the line, please do, and we'll do what we can to cover some of these. Just quickly, via housekeeping, if you are an IAPP certified privacy professional and you're wondering about CPE credits, if you signed up for this program and you're the named registrant, those will be granted to you automatically. There's nothing that you need to do. You will that will just be credited to you for your upkeep of your certification. And if you're listening in but you didn't sign up, you weren't the named registrant, you're still eligible for those credits. You just need to click the live link in front of you or go to our website under the certification tab, and there's a very easy to fill out form there that you can use to receive those credits. If you're an attorney and you're wondering about continuing legal education, CLE credits, this program may or may not be eligible for those. I know that it often is. These programs often are eligible for those credits, but we don't pre-certify them. So you will need to contact your jurisdiction, see what they require. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and apply and hopefully be able to receive those credits. If you need supporting materials in your jurisdiction, for instance, a copy of the slides and or any other information, please contact me and I'll do what I can to help provide you with those supporting materials. My contact information is here in front of you now. Feel free to call or write. We'd love to hear from you, again, how you enjoyed this program and what you might be looking for in the future. And we will be posting a recording of this program approximately 48 hours from now. There's a link in front of you that will take you to the trustee website where you will be able to download a copy of the report, I believe the slides as well, and a copy of this recording if you missed it or wanted to go back to review any of that information. So that's all the housekeeping that I have, and with that, let's see, Marcus, was there anything in particular that you noticed in the question list here that we didn't get to that you wanted to tackle?
There was some discussions that I incorrectly stated CASEL. Yes, I know that the express consent mechanism is actually required now, but the teeth, when you're dealing with businesses that rely on marketing, until you tell them there's an enforcement risk, you're not going to get people to move. So the 2017 mark is really what most companies are pushing towards in terms of implementation. Yeah, if you can get your business to implement an express consent mechanism now for new users moving forward or to refresh current users, that's a great idea. It's just that most businesses are going to want to push back and hear what their risks are. So that's around CASEL. There was questions about my statement about DPOs. Yeah, it's unclear. Again, when I say operations in a country like Ireland, I mean, it depends. If you have an entity that's an actual Irish data controller and you're directly, monitored and controlled by the Irish DPA, I would say having a DPO in place is a good idea. It may not be a requirement. It may well become a requirement under the GDPR. Simply having operations in a country is not sufficient. We have operations in almost all European countries, but we have our data controller structure is set around a few key countries. And then there was some discussion about how you get a copy of the GDPR. I would say, there was a question about what GR meant, government relations. And I would say if you have a government relations team, they should be up to speed on the latest copy. I think there's probably a web page, either the EC or somebody probably has a web page with the latest drafts legislation like we have in the U.S. with pending legislation.
And
but
I'm sure we'll be reporting out on it. So keep an eye on our the publications page, the news page of the IAPP website. I'm sure we'll be providing links for latest updates in the actual regulation once it comes out.
And on that, either I did it. Oh wait, there it is. Mine dropped, so I'm out of questions. So there you go.
All right. Well, that's actually pretty good timing, Marcus. And thank you very much for staying on the line and cleaning up some of the remaining questions. And again, if you do have further questions or want a copy of the slide deck, please do email me. My email address is simple. It's dave@iapp.org. It's right up there on the screen in front of you. and I'd be more than happy to do what I can. So really appreciate all of you joining us today, and with that, I think I'll take us to a program close and hope to see you all on some programs in the near future. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great finish to the week.